Okay, hello guys. So it's my turn to present, and I'm going to be talking about humour and how it's used in Joel and Kat Set the Story Straight for positioning purposes. So let's get started. Humour in Joel and Kat Set the Story Straight. So everyone has their handouts. Yep. Some of us in electronic form. Everyone's got them? Awesome, awesome. Okay. So, what is this book? Joel and Kat Set the Story Straight is a young adult tandem story. So a tandem story, that means it's co-authored by two different authors, Nick Earls and Rebecca Sparrow, and it's about a guy, Joel, and a girl, Kat, who hate each other and wind up having to work together on their own tandem story. So it's essentially like a guy and a girl writing a story about a guy and a girl writing a story, which I thought was very funny. And humour does work very significantly in this story to position the reader, and we'll talk about those key terms, what humour means in the context of this book, and what positioning and distance and involvement means in 1 second. So, key terms, humour. Before we kind of get into the thick of it, let's make sure we have an understanding of humour. Now, defining humour is pretty subjective, but there are some things that are kind of taken as for granted. So, humour is the heart of literature, and it provides lightheartedness, and it lifts the reader's state of mind, but it also has, it's generally wanting to evince a non-serious reaction. It generally involves an unexpected departure from reason or sense, and when you're looking at humour, you can often find the recognition and expression of incongruities, so like abnormalities, things that don't make sense, or peculiarities present in a situation or behaviour. Now to something that's slightly more involved, something called positioning. Does anyone know what positioning might be in a text? Any guesses? No? That's okay, that's what I'm here for. So the syllabus basically describes positioning as the composing technique of causing the reader to adopt a particular point of view and interpret a text in a particular way. It says that composers position their readers and responders by carefully shaping focus and choosing language that provides a particular interpretation and reaction. Cuden says that every reader has at once to be involved with and detached from what he is concentrating on. So positioning is all about this level of involvement and detachment, or distance from the text, from what you're reading. Distance in reading is kind of comparable to looking at a piece of artwork really close up and understanding everything that makes up that artwork and becoming emotionally involved with it, maybe, very immersed in it, and that's kind of like involvement in a text. You're very connected, you're immersed in the text. The metaphor continues, say you step back from that work of art, you can see it as a whole, maybe look at the works of art that are around it, so you're kind of looking at it from a distance, and there's some analytical kind of commentaries you can make on it, and different understandings you have depending on how close or involved you are with text. Now, the question is though, how do humour as a concept that we just looked at, and positioning, distance and involvement, how do they kind of connect with each other and function in this book? So the question, how is humour used to position I distance or involve readers in this book. So humour is often misunderstood or underestimated as a really powerful positioning tool. And we're going to talk now about how it works to great effect in this text. But first, I would say, how does someone use humour to either get you really involved or distance you? First, I think what they have to do is get your attention. So to actually draw your attention, shape your focus, humour gets your attention straight up. So it kind of, to me personally, comes down to the fact that when something is weird or out of place, it captures our attention. We pay more attention to it. So that's what the authors are doing in this text. They're using humour to position the reader. They're consciously making us draw focus on something, and they use humour to do that. So they want us to pay attention to certain parts of what's happening in the story, or to a certain character, or to a character's perspective, and they're using humour to make us highly aware of that, connected to the story, or highly aware of the nature of the text. So they can involve us closely from funny perspectives of the characters, or they can make us pull back and laugh at what's happening to the characters, or the nature of the text itself. Now, let's get into actually specifically, as loath as I am to move away from the guinea pig Nick Cage image, which I really did enjoy finding, and which does illustrate, you can see, that's the first thing you notice. There's a lot of things that can draw someone's attention in a text, but this is a perfect example. If something's funny, you pick up on it immediately. So, the first one we're going to talk about, the way that humour is used in this book to position, is in regards to hyperbole. Does anyone know what hyperbole is? I would assume a lot of people do. Yes, Tom?
When you go over the top.
Yes.
Like when you go way, way beyond what would be considered realistic.
Yeah, it's a massive overstatement of something. So, for example, we've got Kat saying here, I've sneezed about 85 billion times in the past 2 days. That's obviously a huge overstatement. It's hyperbolic. It draws our attention to how she's feeling. So we laugh at it, and then we think, oh yeah, I totally get that. Like when I was sick, I was sneezing 50 times a day and it was the worst thing ever. That's funny, but it also kind of makes us empathize with her and with how she's feeling. So we're becoming empathetic, which does what, do we think?
Allows us to relate to the character.
Yeah, which then involves us really closely in what's actually happening in the text. So it brings you in, it closes the distance, and helps us to see exactly what is happening for Kat and how she's feeling. Now similes, the first two are these are your more simple techniques. I like to call them the one-liners, so hyperbolic statements and one-liners, and you've got similes here. So we've got, Tom, do you want to read out these 3 points I've got, these 3 similes in the book?
Joel says of elderly neighbour Betty, she has a front that behaves like 2 grapefruit in a string bag, which is page 7. Number 2, Kat says of herself, I look like an ironing board with a blonde wig, on page 23. And the third one, Kat describes her mean female retail manager as someone who looks like a praying mantis in drag, page 54.
Excellent, good job. So basically what similes are doing here is, it's the first one, so she has a front that behaves like 2 grapefruit in a string bag. I will say that was one of my favourite lines in the whole book. It's just really effortless, hilarious simile. And what that does is it creates an undeniably vivid image of Betty as a character from Joel's perspective in the reader's mind's eye. And it's another way of kind of involving people really closely in the perspective of someone who's a character in the book. So we're not thinking as a reader, we're thinking as the character when we read something like that. We've got, I look like an ironing board with a blonde wig. that's self-disparaging, especially in Australian culture. That's going to make you identify and enjoy, like reading about. Sorry, it's going to make you identify with her and find Kat appealing, and that's going to involve you in the text. And the last one. So everyone has had a boss that they hate. And perfect example is when Kat describes her mean female retail manager as a praying mantis in drag. So it's connecting us to Kat's disdain and dislike for her boss, and kind of in our empathy we are coming to a dislike of that boss ourselves. And so things like similes, that's a simple comparison, but it really draws you in and brings you at a really close distance, makes you involved with the text. And because it's funny, that's how it does that. Okay, so the next one, intertextuality. So intertextuality is definitely a humorous technique that's used to great effect in this book to distance readers. So in this case, it's pulling us out of the text rather than pushing us in and immersing us. It reminds the reader of the text's connections to other works and media, and it provides a frame of reference in and around the work of art to differentiate it psychologically in the mind of the reader. So intertextuality in Joel and Kat makes the reader think outside the book, and by this is distancing them so they can make analytical comparisons that they wouldn't have if they were very much immersed in the perspective of the character. So we've got Kat pointing out how Joel, in his parts and creative contributions, is ripping off the action adventures of Matthew O'Reilly. We've got the secondary character Luke. His father is in the midst of removing a dead possum from a pool, turning to Luke and saying, "One day all of this will be yours." And that's obviously a clear connection to, you're standing in front of the Lion King and Mufasa saying to Simba, "One day, son, all of this will be yours." And that grandiose connection to the Lion King makes us laugh and reminds us of texts outside the book. And, it causes us to be distant and to be making those analytical comparisons. And the last one is that we've got Kat's little brother Mark, when their parents separate. He's off in the backyard and building what Kat refers to as a jackass-style bike ramp because in his mother's absence there's no one to supervise him. And so we've got these intertextual references that every now and again they'll pull us out of the text, make us think of something else, laugh, and remember that the book is just a book. So it is distancing us very much so from the text itself. So we've got character descriptions. Now, character descriptions, no matter how short, are an important part of the humour of a book. And they help focus, i.e. involve, the reader on the concerns of the protagonist. So character descriptions in this text, Joel and Kat set the story straight, help us to be fully immersed in how Joel or Kat feel about a person. What's their opinion of them? And so when we're coming down to the point of what does one character think about another, that is heavy immersion. We're not thinking as a reader, we're thinking as the character. Do they hold disdain for them? I.e., Sergeant Cohen, when Kat goes to pick up her mother, she sees Sergeant Cohen as a short, fat, bald dim sim of a man. So that shows that she holds disdain for them. Or Joel's disgust for his mother's would-be boyfriend, Jorge. Frankly, if Jorge was any more of a slug, he'd leave a trail, mostly between the fridge and the widescreen TV. So these are really vivid descriptions, and that they cause us to really be thinking about how that person is perceived and what they must be like to know or to meet. And that is an example of a reader being very, very closely immersed in the story. We've even got Emma, who is Kat's best friend. Kat thinks she's stupid, and you can tell this because Kat says she has the IQ of a ham sandwich. These descriptions are creating a clear idea in our mind of the character, and we identify with how Joel and Kat feel. We're not thinking about the text as a whole or in connection to other things or about the nature of the text. We're immersed in the text itself. Humour here is creating a strong sense of reader involvement and a lack of distance. So lastly, we have irony. Sadly, no pictures here. Irony as a humorous technique is used heavily in this book to create a distancing effect in Joel and Kat's perspectives and the reader's perspective. Irony as a language feature generally separates the reader from the story as they are let in on the joke and they see and know things of which the characters themselves are not aware. Irony reminds the reader of their status as audience and not participant in the story, and in this way creates a conscious sense of distance. It can be seen in this story by the continuous building attraction between Joel and Kat that neither is aware of and each thoroughly denies until the end of the book. The reader picks up hints of this attraction early on. You've got lines like Kat saying, "That's the problem with guys who know they're good looking," in regards to Joel, which is a hint. Or Joel saying, "Sure, I say," like someone who couldn't care less that these are our first words in 15 months. He's not someone who couldn't care less. He's pretending to be someone who cares less. He does care, and he's counted the number of months since they spoke. So there's irony here that separates the reader from the characters because the characters have no idea what they're really feeling, but it's clear to the reader, and that reminds the reader that they're a reader, and it distances them from the text. Irony is also well used in the text to provide distance by kind of situational irony. So you've got Kat telling her father, who is languishing over his possible marital separation, to seek solace in a counselling group, and she's unwittingly sending him into the arms of Joel's mother, Disaster, who is leading that group. We know because we've been reading Kat's focalization chapters and Joel's focalization chapters that when Kat sends her father into this group, that he's going to meet Joel's mother, but Kat doesn't know. Situational irony. It is suppressed hilarity, and it is something that reminds the reader again that they know things and see things as the reader that the characters are not, and it distances them. So the reader sees all of this hilarity between Joel's mother and Kat's father coming, and we gain comic enjoyment, and that enjoyment is increased by our knowledge of, like I said, the suppressed hilarity of what's happening or what's about to happen. So what we're going to do after we've talked a little bit about these things is ask some discussion questions. And, it doesn't have to be a perfect answer, just kind of whatever pops into your mind. Just thinking about what we've just been talking about, let that inform what you say and what you think. So from this presentation, what do you guys think makes a text funny? What do you think brings humour in a book? Anyone?
Hyperbole.
Yeah? And why does it do that, do you think?
Because being over the top is like silly and funny, and it allows you to makes situations kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
In that sense, they're funny.
Yeah. Do you think that humour is more or less effective than other literary techniques, and why? So you don't have to rush into your answer for this. I'll give a few seconds. Let's have a think.
It depends what the context is, I guess, within the book. So, for example, the similes in this book are very strong and easy to understand, but more kind of subtle techniques like intertextuality and irony might not necessarily feel. You might not feel as though they're as effective as something that's really like obvious, like hyperbole or similes, or the way a character is described.
Do you think maybe that humour, it comes across as a lot less didactic, like I'm trying to teach you a lesson, or this is what I'm trying to say. It's a lot more subtle. Do you think that makes a difference?
Yeah, I think so. I think some people just think that a joke is a joke. They don't really think that there's a second meaning to it, or there's like a deeper meaning to it.
Yeah, and maybe they're thinking,
subconsciously it kind of does tell a story, or it does teach a lesson.
Yeah, and the reader isn't quite aware of it. They're aware that they're a reader, but they might not be aware of the message they're receiving. So the subtlety in the effectiveness of humour. The last question I've got is, do you think that humour more commonly distances the reader from the text and what's happening and from the characters, or do you think it involves the reader? So just what I'm asking you to do here is think, of funny books you've read, or recent episodes of TV shows you've watched, and did the humour kind of like draw you in, or did it kind of push you out and make you go, oh, that's an intertextual reference, oh yeah, that this is a TV show, I'm not involved. Like, does humour more commonly distance you or involve you as a reader?
I think it definitely involves you more.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, because you tend to, most stories are in the first person, or most dialogue.
Yeah.
Most of the jokes that come are in first person. So, as you're involved in that, and as you read that story or watch the movie or whatever it is, that joke is something that is told to you by another person, whether they're real or not, is kind of irrelevant. So you share that.
Yeah,
that experience with them.
Suspended disbelief, like you get involved and you kind of forget that it's just a TV show, and you go along with the jokes and probably get the messages. And anyway, well, that's all I've got for today. Do you guys have any more questions? Feel free. Does anyone want to see the funny pictures again? Because I had a lot of fun finding them. No? All right. Well, thank you, Lindsay, and I look forward, if you guys want to talk about it afterwards, I'm happy to talk more. But that's all I've got today. Bye!